Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You are in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jen Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. And we are back after a brief hiatus. I could not be more thrilled to be back with you all again after a little bit of break from Marketing Demystified. So welcome. So glad to see you again. And today we are talking about brand voice. We all know that content is table stakes for growing a business, but content without a clear voice is a losing bet. That's why our guest today is a master of voice, comedian, copywriter, and brand strategist, Mimi Von Schack. Mimi currently moonlights as a copywriter for an international brand and has run strategy for Kraft Heinz brands. She's also a shapeshifting character comedian who's appeared at the Just for Laughs, world's largest international comedy festival. And you might have caught her on a Superbowl ad for Wells Fargo this past weekend. We're going to discuss how non-comedians can adopt a comedian's mindset, the importance of specificity, if I can say that word, and why voice matters more than ever with the rise of AI. Mimi, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me, Jen. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. I really want to talk about the Super Bowl ad, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But how was that experience?
Both. We can have a little bit of fun. Oh my gosh, it was so fabulous. The spot includes SNL's Marcelo Hernandez, who was so funny and so great. And it also it's all about celebrating small wins. So they had something called the Party Patrol, which was like 8 circus performers, cheerleaders, dancers, whatever, and they're all kind of dancing around us. And it was an acting challenge because I'm supposed to look kind of surprised and shocked. I was just truly delighted. I love that kind of stuff. There was a guy juggling on a unicycle, and I was like, this is show business, baby. But it was super fun, and I think people thought it was really fun too to watch. It was very joyful, which was great.
I love that. Well, congrats, and thank you for bouncing from Super Bowl Wells Fargo ads to our podcast. I love it. I love having you here. Awesome. Well, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because, we've been seeing a lot of crossover in our industry and in marketing, B2B marketing specifically, with comedy and entertainment. And just last week, we ran an event with a client where we put together findings from a research report that they did called Hidden Women about how brands see or don't see women, and paired that with stand-up comedy at Gotham Comedy Club here in New York. And
I know that Gotham. I know I used to do an open mic there in my 20s.
So I'm sure you've been in that little basement theater with us before. But it was a really, and we did an improv show in the fall as well, where we talked again about research and insights. And, there's just, we're seeing a lot of overlap in how marketers, brand strategists, or researchers can kind of learn about how to communicate from how comics connect with crowds or entertainers. And so I'm just thrilled to have you on here to kind of continue on that thread, because I think there's a lot we can learn. I also recently was told that, somebody in my network suggested that everyone in business take an improv class. And that was a really interesting conversation. And so maybe we can talk about that too. But let's dive right in. I want to hear about how you got into comedy, how you got into brand strategy, and how those two worlds are kind of mixing and matching for you.
They mix and match together really fabulously, which I think a lot of people don't realize. It was always comedy for me. I knew I wanted to be a comedian from a very young age. I loved performing. I came from a theater background, but always doing comedic roles. And I moved out to Los Angeles after college, having done sketch comedy and stand-up in college, and I moved out to LA to do that here. For people who don't know what sketch comedy is, it's basically just what you see on Saturday Night Live. It's characters. It's like performing skits or scenes or whatever. That's what sketch comedy is. So when I started teaching sketch comedy, I was also at the same time starting my career as a copywriter, and I realized pretty quickly that the line between sketch comedy and commercials and marketing is like paper thin. A lot of times what you see in a commercial is a sketch. It follows those comedy beats. It's 3 beats that heighten. It has a resolution. It has a point of view. And I realized I could apply those skills to this thing that I love to do at night, to something I was doing during the day. And people really connect through humor. It's one of the reasons why I love being a comedian. You know, you're connecting with people in a very specific and unique way. You're giving them an involuntary response by laughing, which is intimate and cool. And I realized that there was a really close connection. And I think also when I started copywriting 10 years ago, it had really become a place for brands to show their personality, which 9 times out of 10 had a comedic bend to it. So it felt like a very natural thing. And that was kind of how I would pitch myself to companies as a freelance copywriter. I would say, hey, look, I'm writing comedy all day long. I'm performing comedy every night. That's where my brain's at. And that's what I can bring to your brand.
That's so, yeah, interesting and so true how people connect through comedy, especially, I mean, we are just coming off the Super Bowl the other day, and historically, comedy comes through quite significantly in Super Bowl ads, and it's a way for things to be memorable and also
Totally. You repeat them, they get stuck in your head, they become things that we just say. That's one of my favorite things about comedy is there's things that are just part of our lexicon that started as jokes. And I think commercials are at their best when they're comedic, because, marketing is kind of like a medicine that we all take. So it's really great to enjoy the medicine and have fun. But also it sticks with you, and it's engaging and it's exciting and you remember it. And then as a performer, commercials are kind of like the most fabulous thing because you get an opportunity to like play this little micro character that is a part of people's lives in this like teeny tiny little way, which is very cool.
It is really cool. I guess one thing I'm thinking about, like, how do you think about making sure that when you're considering how to incorporate comedy into, say, a commercial or an ad or anything marketing related, that it still connects with the brand and doesn't, we've all seen Super Bowl commercials or comedic commercials where you're like, oh my God, remember that hysterical commercial? I don't remember who it was for.
Yeah.
But it was so funny, right? Like, how do you make sure that you sort of walk that line of making it funny and memorable and having it be something that the audience connects with, but also actually serves the purpose of driving awareness?
We don't forget what we're looking at. Well,
exactly.
I always think about this thing. You mentioned improv, right? And so improv comedy for folks who don't know is when you're given a suggestion and you make up a scene and you do kind of like a little funny play on the spot. And most of the time, what the humor comes from in improv, which people don't realize, is just recognition of an experience we all have. We sometimes just laugh at the recognition. So I think if you're selling a product that speaks to an experience that we all have, mining the comedy in that is what makes it memorable and what connects it. The Super Bowl commercial that I'm thinking about a whole lot as someone who watched is there was a commercial for prostate cancer, which is not a happy or pleasant topic, but my gosh, was it funny. It was so funny. And it really stuck with me because all of the imagery and all of the humor actually came from what it was about. It wasn't a separate comedy sketch where they tacked on, hey, get checked. It was all about finding peace of mind, and it connected to the actual emotion of someone going through that. And usually that is a really good recipe for memorable comedy, which makes it a really good recipe for memorable marketing. Does it connect on an emotional level? Is it something that I can easily recognize as a universal experience or as a unique experience to do with this thing? And is it presented in a way that feels authentic and meaningful? Those tend to be the 3 pieces that I think really make it connect.
Yeah, I think that's super important to make sure that, that's a great example of something where you actually use the topic of conversation as the source of comedy, as opposed to just something that also is funny.
Yes.
Right?
It all kind of has to connect. And I think, a lot of times companies kind of let their freak flag fly, their comedy flag fly in social media. And one of the ways that they do that is by hopping onto these trends. Well, nothing signifies that you're not connected to your brand quite like doing a trend that doesn't match the tone of your brand. That to me, I'm always like, ooh, like it hurts my heart because I'm like, I can just tell that's not you, or it's not relevant to what you do, or it's, it's not the brand sense of identity. Just because it's a funny thing doesn't mean it's going to be a funny thing for you, because comedy really hinges on a sense of recognition and connection.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important piece of what we want to talk about today is like your brand voice, right? And how do you make sure that in any kind of marketing content, whether that be commercial or your engagement on social media, I can think of so many brand examples of, companies that do this really well, and companies that, like you said, you see it and you go, I'm not seeing it, right? Like,
I feel forced. And that's,
does.
Many of us have been to, gosh, you know what? Even if you haven't been to a comedy show, you've been to a wedding and you've heard a bridesmaid speech, you've heard a best man speech where you were just going, oh my God, get me out of here. And it's usually because they're not talking about what's happening that day. That's usually the issue, right? They're trying to make something funny by pulling something out of thin air that's not really relevant to what's going on. If you stay relevant to what the product, what the situation, what the user experience is, and mind that. And, there's an improv exercise that I think about a lot when I think about writing, which is you think about what's in the room. So a lot of times in improv, we get a suggestion of a place. So if I get an airport, I don't just say, okay, I'm sitting on an airplane on the tarmac. There's a million places I could be in that airport. I have to look at what's around me. I could be picking up a magazine. I could be in the bathroom stall trying to figure out where I'm going to put all of my bags and trying to do around that. I could be taking off my shoes. I could be in the airport Chili's. I could be anywhere in there, but I have to mine that experience for things that feel not just relevant, but also unique, because specificity tends to be what makes things funny. Specificity is a backdoor into things that are funny. So when you're playing it too broad or you're not playing it personal, you lose a lot of comedy just naturally.
That's interesting. And that's the word I can't say. So stay away from it. But so specificity. And I want to also connect this back. You said something in the beginning about when you were talking about how marketing and sort of copywriting and content overlap. You talked about the 3 comedy beats.
Yeah.
And so just overall, I want to understand, like maybe listeners who enjoy comedy and maybe don't know some of the inner workings. I'm certainly one of them. Could you talk a little bit about some of those specific tactics, the comedy beats, specificity, timing, point of view, all of those kind of fun things, and how that can apply into your work with content?
Yeah. So when we talk about writing a comedy sketch, we talk about 3 beats that heighten. Depending on where you learned comedy, you might call it different things, but that's what I call it. So essentially, we're getting our premise, and then that world is going to get a little bit more intense, a little bit crazier. It's going to just kind of build and build and build. And that building is what makes something funny. The example I always use, because it's a comedy sketch that a lot of people know, is Will Ferrell with the cowbell. That's always the way I describe it, because a lot of us know it. If you don't know it, it is a perfect thing to look up on YouTube as a great example of how to heighten comedy and how to go specific. He's in the recording studio. He's hitting that cowbell. It's not that loud, but we get the fact that it's annoying. We get the premise pretty quickly. We get the fact that the stakes are high. Stakes is another really important thing to create a comedy moment. That to me is always the thing that takes, like a commercial or a marketing ad up. Like, why do we care? We ask that a lot in marketing. Why do we care? Why do we care about this product? That's the same in comedy. So we know what the stakes are, but then he just keeps playing that cowbell louder and louder. He knows somebody's annoyed. He's getting in his ear with it. That's heightening. So it's heightening, and that's what's making the humor, because even though we can almost anticipate that he's only going to get bigger and bigger, we don't exactly know how he's going to get bigger. And then there's that element of surprise that makes it really funny. So I think thinking about, creating stakes, all of these things which feel a little more like artistic than they do like kind of grounded in marketing. It's all kind of the same. I think really great marketing campaigns that I've seen, they're identifying something, they're kind of giving us our premise, and then they're heightening on that premise as the campaign goes on. And that holds our attention. It gets us interested. We want to see what's going to happen next. And we want to see how they're going to approach those ongoing beats. I hope that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's a great example to think about. And immediately I'm like, oh my gosh, I can think of 5 other examples that maybe I never really connected what they're doing.
Yeah.
But this is funny to me and is like eternally funny and always in the back of my mind because it achieves exactly what you're describing. And also, by the way, I mean, maybe the Will Ferrell cowbell isn't really like a universal experience that you're in a recording studio, but there's others, right, where you have
Absolutely.
that.
Well, it plays on something that we all know. It's an E True Hollywood story. We all saw that on the TV for a period of time.
Right.
It's more or less as close to monoculture as we can get. It's a trope that we can all recognize. I think a lot of great stuff happens there too. Again, I go back to recognition, laughs of recognition, laughs of understanding.
Yeah.
I worked a lot in food, and with food, there's some universal experiences we all have. We all know the feeling of, I got home from work and I don't want to make anything, and I'm not in the mood, and I'm going to eat over the sink. That is a pretty universal experience that then we can work and we can mine and we can, whatever.
Sure. Okay, that's interesting. So now I'm thinking about, as a marketer, applying some of these ideas to content, and maybe it's not even like, it doesn't have to be that the content is comedic in the end. But the concepts that you're describing of like, there's a premise, there's high stakes, and we're heightening some sort of reveal or that concept throughout whatever that kind of piece of content is. It doesn't necessarily have to be funny to learn from and take from that.
Absolutely. It's still storytelling, right? Something that I love about comedy is it's a microcosm of storytelling. And now once you have it in your head, you'll see it in movies all the time. You'll get that sense of stakes being set up, and then they're managing those stakes in a bunch of different ways. That's that same 3 beats that heighten, right? That's all the same thing. So to me, that's just good storytelling. And I think, to me, the other thing that is, and I say this as someone who talks nonstop. I've already talked nonstop in the last 15 minutes, but
we're grateful for it.
You regret having me on a podcast because I have no problem talking, honey. There's the Shakespeare quote, brevity is the soul of wit. That tends to make things funny. Well, economy of language, brevity of language, that's impactful marketing, whether it's funny or not. It just tends to be, less is really more. And that is definitely true in comedy. So it doesn't have to be particularly hilarious, but I do think it makes things a little bit grabbier. And thinking about the story that you're telling, identifying what the need is, how the product or the service serves that need, that's stakes. That's stakes and heightening. It's all kind of the same to me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that concept of brevity is so critical in marketing. Like, you have to communicate your message really quickly. You need people to understand what you're saying really quickly. It doesn't mean you can't write long blog articles or, longer form pieces of content. But as you're talking about the sort of beats that heighten, I'm thinking, I always say to like my team or my clients or whatever, like, the goal of the first line of something is to get you to read the second line. So if you're in that, when you're writing or when you're creating anything, even if it's a visual piece of marketing, the goal of the first element is to get you to the second element. We're not closing deals on the first sentence.
Absolutely. I mean, and you could even, I think another way that you could phrase it, this is another kind of metaphor that I use that, tends to help people to understand, where comedy comes from. It's tension and release. So you're creating tension and then you're releasing it. And I think that I always try to think of it as a rubber band. If I'm doing an hour-long show, I'm pulling that rubber band back more and I'm releasing it a little bit over time. But if I'm just doing 5 minutes on stage, I'm whatever it is, right? I still want to build that tension and I want to release it. And to me, in a marketing context, that's identifying the problem, immediately solving it.
I like that a lot. And as you're thinking about how to identify the problem and solve that problem, the key there is you've got to understand who you're talking to, right?
Exactly.
Like, not everybody has the same problems, and maybe your segment of audience is very specific. Maybe it's quite broad. Either way, there's an understanding that needs to happen because, as you describe, like, oh, there's a universal experience of not wanting to cook and wanting to eat over the sink, right? There is, there has to be some knowledge of that shared experience, right? And so I'm curious about, where, I guess, as you're thinking about writing for comedy, but then also in your content work, like, where are your character ideas coming from? Where are your concepts and premises coming from? And how are you kind of building that in so that you are solving a real problem that your segment is, you're snapping that rubber band on something that you validated that people actually do care about?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's the same answer for me in both contexts, which is knowing your audience is one thing. Recognizing that not everyone is going to be your audience is another thing. And once you recognize that not everybody is going to be in your audience, then you can actually speak to the people who are your audience. I think the same thing happens in comedy that happens in marketing all the time, which is, of course, we all want to be for everyone. We all want to be for everyone. One of my great fantasies is to get everybody in the room laughing. I would love that. But the reality is I can't control that. And the reality is there's going to be people who buy into what it is that I'm doing, who are in this mental image of the audience I have that are out of it. I can't really control that. And I think the big stumbling block that I see it with comedians. I see it with myself as a comedian. I see it with marketers. I see it with myself as a marketer, right? Which is we want to please everyone. And when you please everyone, you kind of abandon your audience because there's not that specificity. So recognizing that I'm not going to be for everyone, if my demographic is, moms that are struggling to get dinner on the table. Well, if I'm also worried about, college students who are cooking in their dorm room, but then I'm also worried about, folks that are now, empty nester, I'm not going to be able to speak to all of them at once in an authentic way. And that's very true of comedy too. I'm not going to be able to speak to all of them at once in an authentic way because we're all having very different experiences. And I need to tap into the experience that's going to create that recognition so I can find a specific tension point for the release. I can't do that if I'm thinking about a million different people.
Yeah. I think that's a challenge a lot of people at companies have because when we talk about ideal customer or we talk about target audience, the answer is often anybody could buy our product, right? And that could be true. Maybe anybody could buy it, but there is an ideal audience. And Seth Godin does a great job of explaining this through the concept of worldviews that, not everybody is your audience. And actually, if you can do a really good job of speaking to a smaller segment, you're going to be more successful than trying to be all things to all people. And that's totally true with comedy too.
Oh my God. And that's, this is the interesting thing. And I'm going to kind of rant and rave a little bit just about the comedy side of things, which I think people who do online and social media marketing will identify with. The way that these algorithms work now is that your work doesn't just go to your audience. It shows up for everybody. And what I feel as a comedian, sometimes I will post my comedy online and it's rare, but it does happen. Someone will really give it to me in the comments. They hate it. They don't like me. They don't, whatever. And I always think, well, sweetheart, I didn't write it for you. It wasn't for you. I don't particularly like country music, but I don't go to country music shows and scream, play something else, because it's not for me. There's people who love it, and I should let them love it. And then I'll love the thing that I love, which is show tunes. Right. So it's like, it's okay to like what you like, but because our material gets pushed to everyone, I think there can feel this added pressure of, well, it has to please everyone. And it doesn't. And I also think on that point, something I'd like to say is whenever I'm working on developing brand voice for a client, something I like to say, and this is just my kind of personal take on it. I don't think this is prescriptive for everyone or every comedy writer, but to me, the voice I'm using shifts on where I'm using that voice. So the way that I talk to the customer on social media is going to be different than the way I talk to them in an email marketing campaign. It's going to be different from the way I talk to them in an end cap at a store. It's going to be slightly different. Business is going to be different. And that's what we do in life too, right? The way we talk to our friends is a little different than how we talk to our family versus how we talk to our coworkers, how we talk to clients, all those things. And it's the same for comedians. I'm changing my set depending on what the venue is, so that I can speak to that audience more clearly and more authentically. But I think, trying to assume that something you put, especially on social media, is going to speak to everybody that's a losing battle.
And so that's a super interesting point. And I guess my question is, how do you think about maintaining your voice principles and maintaining consistency while also being flexible enough to adjust based on maybe its channel? A great example would be like brands, how they show up on Reddit, for example. Right. You have a very specific role as a brand in a community like Reddit. It is a user-led space, and you have been maybe invited to be there, maybe not. So you have to definitely show up in a very specific way to not have it kind of work against you. You want to be helpful and there when they ask you, and no more, no less, right? Whereas on your owned channel, a TikTok or something, maybe you're going to have a different, there's different rules around what you can and can't say, I guess, in terms of like what's acceptable. And to your point, email is going to be different if it's with customers versus. So with all of that in mind, how do you adjust accordingly while maintaining consistency?
Well, that's a really great question. I look at it a little bit like character work, right? So, a great hack I tell people for when they're developing their own characters is, what's their point of view that's always going to be true no matter where they are? And I kind of do the same thing with brands. I say, okay, well, what's the point of view that's going to be true no matter where we are? I will use an example of a company that I still do some work with, where they do really fabulous luxury candles. And we talk about the fact that it's always accessible. It's always accessible luxury. That's always true. That's always the point of view. But we kind of look at who's our demographic in each place. The folks who are signed up for our email newsletter, that's kind of all over the map, but it tends to skew, like who's opening them, it tends to skew to a little bit of an older audience. Our social media is definitely 20s, 30s, a little bit 40s, right? So that's kind of a different thing. And then who we're getting on TikTok is we're kind of getting people who are just finding us in the algorithm, right? And they're probably going to be spanning all different ages. But if it's always true that it's accessible luxury, what I like to do is, when I'm working with a brand, is I literally come up with, which you would do with a character. A lot of times to get into a character, you have a phrase, you have a word that kind of gets you into that voice. Just for the sake of entertainment, I will do an example.
Oh, great.
I hope nobody laughs. No. But I do a woman who, she's, and may God help me because I do not do a good Southern accent. But she is a Southern woman, and she drinks wine and solves mystery with her friends. And to get into her, I always have to go, oh, I love that. Oh, I love that. And once I say that phrase, now I can kind of find her, and I know what my face is doing. So I have a little line that gets me in and gets me going as her. So I do a similar thing. So I have a line for kind of each thing that gets us into that voice.
Mhm.
There's a specific line that'll get us into the email marketing. There's a specific line that'll get us into the social media marketing. There's a specific line that'll get us in the business to business, because we're hitting different things. And then in each of those, I will create a handful of words and phrases that build out that vocabulary. There's a lot of overlap between them, but there's also a lot of little specific points. And I think that helps identify how we keep our overall mission statement,
Mhm.
but we know how to slightly adjust language so that it'll resonate on that platform.
Mhm. Yeah, that's super helpful, and I love your little I'm not gonna attempt the voice because I have no
It's
practice.
such a bad Southern accent. And for anyone who's listening, please, I know it's bad. And as someone who has a Long Island accent, I know it's bad.
I mean, as someone who can't do an accent, I thought it was great, but I'm not Southern. But
Well,
I think in addition to thinking about channels, it also works quite well when thinking about personas, because I think this is another area that trips people up sometimes. Like, well, we want to say something different to these 5 different personas. And really there is always a common thread. There's
mhm.
always a common thread that runs across all of them, and you have to find that and point back to it every time.
A mission statement, you
Mhm.
kind of have your mission statement is always true. Your point of view is always true.
Yes.
And it's true for characters, and it's true for marketing. You always have that same point of view that drives the essence of the personality, that makes it different from a different character. It's going to make it different from a different brand. If you
Mhm.
have that point of view, that can still be true, even though we're kind of shifting in between how we speak to people. But I think
Right.
also, and I just want to make sure that I say this, because this is really my mission statement. I'm getting my bread buttered, Jen.
You should.
I think I think consumers are really, really smart when it comes to marketing now.
Mhm.
I think they're really, really smart,
Mhm.
and and they don't miss a beat. They clock everything. They're really savvy, and so I think when you make those micro changes to really grab and speak to whoever you're talking to in that platform, when you match the tone of that platform, when you match the tone, how you talk in your paper marketing at an expo is going to be so wildly different than what you put on your, public Instagram
Mhm.
or social media or whatever. That is so wildly different. And when you make those shifts, I really think it helps the consumer have a sense of respect for the brand and
Mhm.
authenticity and honesty. And I think we cannot ignore the fact that as time is going on, people are being a little bit more choosy about who they align with and who they keep coming back to and purchasing from over and over again, you know, um, and speaking honestly and speaking in a way that is specific, I think really resonates.
Yeah, yeah. I would agree with that, and I think, like you were saying just about comedy or content kind of being available to everyone, marketing messages are, I mean, nonstop, right? Nonstop, everywhere you turn, in your hand, right? Whereas years and years ago, back in the olden times,
You could pick
we
and
were
choose when you engaged with it.
correct. And we were discovering new products on the shelf or in a magazine ad. It was we weren't being inundated with these messages all the time. And I think, there has been this sort of, difficulty to tell what's authentic and what's trying to sell me something. And I think there is this, this thing of like, I know you're trying to sell me something. Like, I'm okay with trying to be sold, but don't try to sell me anything. You know what I mean? Like, don't try to
Mm.
convince me I need
Don't
something
talk
I
down to
don't.
me. Don't
Right.
talk down to me. The thing that we
Right.
say in comedy is play to the top of your audience's intelligence.
Mm.
And I think that could not be more true when it comes to marketing.
Mhm.
Play to assume that your audience is clever, because they
Mhm.
are.
Yeah.
Because they are. And in years of doing stand up, there would always be some comedian who go, the audience is so stupid. I'm going to have to explain this whole thing to them. They would go out there and the audience would hate them.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. That's
that they were talking
over-explained.
down to them. They were assuming that they weren't going to understand it. Audiences are savvy. They are just savvy. And it's because to your point, I think you said it best. It's in our hands. We see it all the time, whether we want to or not. So the media literacy for the average consumer is through the roof.
Yeah. And I think that also,
you
yeah, it also speaks to the need for what you've been talking about, this specificity and also simplicity of message,
Mhm.
because I think it might seem like that's contradictory, right? Like we know how smart our buyers are, especially, we work primarily on B2B side of things. Like e- everybody's highly intelligent, but
Mhm.
also very busy and
Yes.
being inundated with messages. So you need to give them something that does not require explanation. They
Yes.
don't need it because they're smart enough to figure it out, but also the simplicity of, they need to understand really fast
Mhm.
that you understand their problem and that you have a unique way to solve it.
Yeah, you
That's
gotta
it.
click into that premise right away. You gotta click
Mhm.
into that point of view right away, and we say the same thing in comedy, right? It's like we gotta just grab them in those first couple seconds,
Mhm.
um, and or they're gonna move on, or they're gonna
Yeah.
check out, or and the other thing that I think of it as when I'm teaching comedy, something I say a lot is you have to build trust with the audience. You
Mhm.
have to let the audience know that you're gonna take care of them, that you're on the same side, and that you're gonna, you're not gonna leave them out in the cold. It's embarrassing to sit in an
Yeah.
audience and laugh. It is. I do it all the time, and it is innately vulnerable. So
Yeah.
you wanna build that trust, and I think that is so true as a brand. When you build that trust from a copywriting perspective,
Mhm.
it is awesome because there's so much you can do with that. You can
Yeah.
get a little bit more creative. You can get a little bit more edgy and trust that they'll go on the journey with you. And then I think it's more fun. When I freelance with companies, I always think of the same thing. I always say the same thing when I go and I'm like, I just want to get you high on your own supply. I spend so much time building out your services, building out your products, whatever it is, that maybe you're not seeing them as clearly as someone on the outside is. You're not even seeing the full value of them because you're so caught up in the details because it's so much work, to build your business. It's an incredible amount of work. Um, and there's so many factors. So it's great to go in there and say, well, what's another way we can look at this? And
Mhm.
not just get consumers excited about it, but also get employees and founders and managers excited about it too, where it
Mhm.
feels like it reflects this unique thing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like, you know, maybe a little bit of patience with that is
Mhm.
helpful because as you're talking about like building trust and in a room, right? You might only have 5 minutes as a comedian to build that trust, establish that trust. Maybe you have an hour if you're lucky, but it's typically only a few minutes.
Yeah,
We as brands have a lifetime. We have a lifetime to
yeah.
establish if we do it the right way to establish trust and maintain it. So a little bit of like, it doesn't have to be overnight that we do one thing, that one thing does all the things for us. It's an accumulation over time and it has
You're
to have
developing it. You're
consistency.
developing that voice,
Yeah.
and that voice is going to change,
Mhm.
It's gonna change as you start to understand who's listening, and that's true with comedy, I can create a character, but I don't necessarily know who it's going to be until I've done it a bunch of times,
Mm.
until I've played in front of a bunch of different audiences and kind of run my own data. Okay, well, this group, which was kind of this kind of makeup, they laughed at this and they liked this, but then this group liked this. And then also ultimately thinking, well, what felt good for me?
Mhm.
What was satisfying for me? What was true for me? Um, I think about that all the time as a performer. What's going to connect with whom and over time, how is that going to change and develop? Because it is. It's just
Mhm.
it's going to change. I'm going to learn more about who's listening to me, who my audience is, the more I do it.
Mhm. And this brings up such an important point, and, for anybody skeptics listening in or anyone like me, I'm a data nerd, I wanna know, like, the metrics, like, how do you see a focus on voice
Mhm.
impacting the metrics? And like you're saying, how do you measure it and optimize? Like, what are you looking for, to ensure that what you're implementing is actually working?
Mhm. I mean, I think what I look for as a copywriter is engagement.
Mm-hmm.
What are people engaging with? Especially if I'm working on like social media. How are they engaging with it? How are they responding to it? However, I do want to say something about the using data to inform voice.
Mm.
I think sometimes, and this is, I told you I was going to have one controversial take. This is
I'm so ready.
I think a lot of times brands will use data to inform the voice, but by the time they are able to implement that voice and use it, the data has changed.
Mm.
That is my feeling. I think that is why I'm kind of against relying so much on data to develop the voice.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can use it in a more anecdotal way, understanding what people are responding to, looking at it as a big picture. But I think when you're making all of your decisions creatively based on metrics, you're going to fall behind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you are going to lose a sense of authenticity because then you're living and dying by data that isn't necessarily going to stay true, especially, and I think in this case, I'm mostly talking about social media marketing because we're all kind of at the mercy of the algorithm. I think once we kind of tap into, okay, well, this is what this group of people saw and loved. Well, it's going to be a new group of people that sees it. By the time we put something new out, it's not, those numbers aren't necessarily going to match up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think when it comes to implementing that, it's a grain of salt. It's okay. I know that this tends to be the group that's listening to me. If it's 18 to 24-year-olds, all right, I'm going to kind of jump into that voice and live in that voice a little bit more than I would for 45 to 60, because those are definitely two different voices. But I'm not going to live and die on that metric because it might affect the authenticity of my voice in the long term. It means I'm jumping on every piece of data and I'm not necessarily building an authentic voice separate from that.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that having, like you just described, kind of that one metric that you're using and then like immediately implementing something as a result maybe isn't the best way to approach it.
Long game. I think to your point, like the patience thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it plays against the long game. I think when people become dependent on the metrics, then they lose. It's just it's trend jumping. You're losing that development of voice that grows over time because you're doing everything at the whim of numbers that are always changing and that can't really stay consistent and true.
Sure. I think as a very data-driven marketer myself, I think what's really important is to have a kind of curious mindset and to be in a state of continuous discovery. This is, sort of, and I agree with you. I think there's one of the problems with data and marketing is that there's 1,000,007 different metrics we could be measuring at any given time. And only a couple of them matter, in my opinion. And which ones those are is going to be different for everyone. It depends on where you are in your business and your brand and what you're trying to impact. I think what's really important is to say, if we were to move the needle on X, that would have the biggest impact on our business. So we want, maybe it turns into a social media engagement metric or something. Probably not, but it's probably something different than that. But something that point in time, you're right, is not enough to make a really big strategic decision.
Yeah. And I think, I think I agree with you. And I think it's very personal. I understand why people, will value a data-driven decision over a creative one sometimes. I do get that. And I get, especially when you're investing money and time and resources into it, I do understand that. I think it's a very personal preference of what you feel is going to be worth your investment. And I'm biased. I like the more creative one.
Yeah. Well, I think, what plays into it, I think, is risk, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm working on Diet Pepsi, that's like a long-standing brand, maybe has a a consistent voice already, and doing something really off-brand would really damage a huge revenue line for the business, then I'm probably gonna lean away from it or run smaller experiments. If
Totally.
I'm kind of like a startup brand and I'm just launching into the marketplace, I have a little bit more freedom to play and I can be more creative. The other thing I talk about a lot is, defining what success looks like at the start of anything that you do. And sometimes success is like you described, like it's if I feel good about it.
Yeah.
If we just did this thing and everybody's high-fiving and going, that was a success, maybe that is the success metric. Sometimes it's a number, sometimes it's data. In a lot of cases it can be, in a lot of cases it can't. And that's okay too, as long as everybody involved is like in agreement about what success looks like before you start. And sometimes saying, hey, this is a creative exercise, we want to see how this feels and what the response is, then that might be a different way to measure it.
Oh, totally. And I mean, I think as a copywriter and creative strategist, I think the way that I always think is it's very personal to where that company is in their experience. If I'm working with a brand that has such a built-in audience and they're really passionate fans of certain products and they're used to something, I'm going to approach that entirely differently than I'm going to approach, a startup or a small business that's, just getting going. It's going to be a different creative approach. Similarly, it's to bring it back to the comedy metaphor. If I'm performing for people who've seen me perform a bunch and they want to see me play the hits, which is something I might do. I don't have the hits. I don't have that.
I want to hear about this Southern woman. That sounds like a hit to me.
Your listeners are Googling and they're like, she's not famous. Like, is one of her characters an inflated ego? Because she's nailing it. But I think with those bigger brands, we want to, we want to see things that we recognize. We want to build on something that we recognize, and maybe find some moments for specificity that already exists. Especially if I'm coming into a company that they already have a whole brand story. They've maybe had other copywriters, they've had other strategists, whatever. I'm gonna think about how I can put my special little stink on it and find some new ways to build upon what's already there, to dial in some specificity, dial in some, some unique new moments that might be something that's in the realm of what they've already done, but hasn't been seen before. But if it's a brand new company and we're figuring it out, then yeah, I mean, I love using the phrase that you used, running experiments. I mean, that's exactly what it is. You're figuring out what people respond to. You're figuring out what you respond to, what's feeling good, what's feeling authentic, and what's feeling like it's more, I'm trying to be another brand. I'm trying to copy that. A lot of times, I remember as a comedy writer, when the game Cards Against Humanity came out,
yeah,
I got more requests in my inbox to help people write their version of Cards Against Humanity than you can imagine.
Interesting.
So many people wanted, because it had been such an overnight success.
Sure.
It was a little, card startup with like a low overhead to get it going. And it was this great thing and everybody wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. And the conversation I would have is, well, but what's going to make it specific to you? Mm-hmm. If we're just trying to replicate it, it's not going to be, it's not going to be special.
Yeah. And I think that's hard for, you want to see something that's working and you think it's going to work for you too.
Exactly. And it might not. It might not. You have different reach. You've got your fingers in different pies. People are going to want something different. But I will say this, and I'm getting my bread buttered, and I'm going to say it. I'm sorry. Cut it out from the final cut if you want.
We're leaving it in.
I think I'm going to make a case, again, very biased, for companies who are looking to hire copywriters and creative, and anyone on their creative team. My mantra with creative work and whenever I'm setting clients up with other freelancers and other contractors, I always go to people who have artistic backgrounds. Mm-hmm. that have comedy backgrounds, that have theatrical, film, whatever, to do a lot of this work. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, they're going to bring a new take to it. Their experience of audiences is going to be very different. Their relationship to consumers and potential clients is going to be different. And they might approach it, which this isn't going to be the right fit for everybody, but they might approach it from a different perspective than, a major ad agency would. But the other thing is they really need the work. We really want the work and we love the work. And it is a little, it's a little more creatively risky, right? Because we're going to use different tools to make decisions creatively. But if it's something that you have the space in your business to do, it can really be revitalizing because it's a new perspective.
Yeah, I love that. I love just like that new perspective, I think is so important. And just in general, like hiring people from different backgrounds with different experiences is a great way to go, whether you're in product or in marketing or anything. I think obviously having actual on the job experience can be really important, but sometimes having a different perspective is really interesting and can change the way you're approaching things.
Especially in this world where AI is really becoming such I can't tell you how much it's changed my experience in my job, having AI. And I frequently, I used to have this at the beginning of my career. People would pay, like half of my rate to someone else to copyright. And then they'd come back and they'd be like, I hate it. Can you fix it? And I'd be like, well, yeah, I mean,
I'm going to charge you double now.
Yeah, well, you get what you pay for, right? And I think AI is a similar thing. You get what you pay for. So you are going to be missing that human link that pulls together all the things that make things funny, makes things engaging, makes things real. And that's connotations. We have different connotations of words. We have different connotations of situations. We bring our own experience to everything. And that's how we create an emotional connection to it. And so that's why I encourage people who maybe are a little bit more on the fringes of marketing work and creative work, because they're going to bring a different level of authenticity to it that you just can't beat. And that I think audiences do pick up and do notice,
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned it earlier that people are savvy and they can absolutely tell when something is written by AI.
Oh my God.
And, it's not to say that it's not a useful tool. It's not a creative tool, in my opinion.
It's not a creative tool, in my opinion, either. It is just not. And it is, I'm going to be real. When you bring in a copywriter after you've used AI and we have to go through and parse through all of that AI, honey, there is egg on your face. It is. It just hit me. I'm like, oh God, and then I think it also actually weakens content teams and creative teams because they get used to giving AI creative prompts, which then makes it very difficult. I talk to friends who are graphic designers and work in other creative elements, and they say it's really hard to work with teams again when they've become reliant on their creative services with AI. They don't know how to give feedback. They don't know how to ask for what they want. And then it makes the process with us as the creatives a lot harder because we have to go back. We have to kind of, figure out what it is that you want and what you need, which ends up being more expensive. It's great for me, but it ends up being more expensive and it ends up being more time consuming. And I think it's like kind of an unfortunate thing when it's used that way, for lots of reasons, but mainly because I think it weakens the creative voice that gets built by a creative voice isn't built by one person, it's built by an entire team. So
well, and I think the other thing too is the purpose of content is to perform in some way, right? And if you're writing content for search, for example, AI content is not going to show up in search. It's certainly not getting picked up by AI in search, which is how people are looking for information. So if your goal is to get eyeballs and to get this to show up, if it's not unique and if it doesn't have your kind of unique human perspective incorporated, if it's not useful, if it's sort of regurgitated from a bunch of stuff that already exists on the internet, then it's not going to perform. And so it's actually a waste of time to do. It's not to say that there isn't a sort of project management or efficiency step, or even to spark creative ideas. I've definitely used AI to kind of scrape the internet and scrape Reddit and say, what are the topics that people are talking about? What are some misconceptions that keep coming up in these specific, communities that I might have a perspective on?
Well, right? And that's what I use SEO for. I really consider SEO to be, to use an improv term, the suggestions. If you're in an improv show, they throw out suggestions. That's how I use SEO. I look to see what are people asking about. I'm a huge fan of using SEMrush as a way to just start the process for me and seeing, okay, well, what are people talking about? And then I'm diving a little bit deeper, but I'm not diving deeper from data. I'm just kind of using my noggin. I'm like, okay, if it's phrased this way, if it's connecting to these different ideas, I can make some assumptions about who's asking this question. I can make some assumptions about that already tells me their language. And I'm not even touching AI. And it's already telling me how they're using language. It's already telling me the connotations around this and related terms. And I'm still using data to generate creative ideas, but I'm not pulling from something that is going to weaken my output.
Yeah.
And waste a lot of water in the process, like I can use, exactly. I can use something that's also then going to help my client. If I'm using those search engine optimized terms, then we're going, baby. Not only do we have, a great creative prompt that speaks to the audience and tells us about the audience, I have something that's going to show up in a search. And it's going to help people find the product. And then when they do find it, they'll find it in a creative way, which we love.
That's what we want. In the end of the day, that's what we want. Amazing. This has been such a lovely conversation. I can't believe it's been an hour. I'm so sorry I have to let you go, but
no, I'm sorry. Listen, I'm drinking coffee. I'm gabbing. We're talking comedy. I mean, you can't stop me, Jen.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Mimi. I just really appreciate all of your takes and for sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Marketing Demystified wherever you get your podcasts and join us next time for more conversations that help demystify